I'm gonna start this off by saying that I understand the search for the worst cartoon is not meant to be for cartoons that I personally don't like, and it is instead meant to be for cartoons that are objectively bad, in which this is one of them, I'm afraid. But I'm sorry, I gotta make an exception, okay? I have a long history with this show, and you know what? I figure if I don't do this, then I'm gonna regret it for the rest of my life if I don't take this opportunity. Please, listen, just once, let me be biased, okay? Just this once, let me be biased. Actually, no, twice, okay? Because I forgot this thing existed, okay? Just only 2 times. Let me be biased. And this one right here, we could do it at a much later date. We don't have to do it right now. We could do it later on into like 2024, okay? Just twice, okay? 2 times. And that's it. Let me tell you all a story. Once upon a time, there was a channel named Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon first debuted on air in 1979. However, it wasn't until 1991 where it truly became what it is now. And it all started with 3 shows: Rugrats, The Ren and Stimpy Show, and Doug. The rest is animation history. Throughout the 90s and 2000s, Nickelodeon would provide kids with all kinds of great cartoons, many of which still hold up to this day, all these years later. SpongeBob SquarePants, Hey Arnold, Danny Phantom, Invader Zim, Avatar The Last Airbender, The Fairly OddParents, The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, My Life as a Teenage Robot, the list goes on. Nickelodeon was the greatest in the 90s and the 2000s, and for a long time it seemed like nothing could stop them. And then the 2010s happened, and although the early 2010s weren't as bad of a period for Nickelodeon as people made it out to be, there definitely was a noticeable downgrade from the 90s and 2000s. There were still good shows here and there, but for the most part you had shows that weren't very good, to say the least. But even then, even during this time when the bad started to outweigh the good, there was still a little bit of hope that one day Nickelodeon could go back to how they used to be and start creating quality content again. And then everything changed in May of 2016 when a little show would be released onto the network entitled The Loud House. The Loud House is a show about a boy named Lincoln Loud who has to try surviving being the only boy in a family full of 10 sisters. Upon the show's release, many people praised it as being a return to form for Nickelodeon, the first great Nicktoon in a very long time, the show that will save Nickelodeon and bring in a new golden age for the network. And for the first time in forever, it was the first successful non-SpongeBob Nicktoon. Unfortunately, much to the dismay of the animation community, it would end up being the only successful non-SpongeBob Nicktoon. What many people thought would happen with The Loud House was that it would usher in a new golden age for Nickelodeon. Finally, Nickelodeon has a new good show. They have something that's actually good. So hopefully this means that we will get even more good Nicktoons. Finally, a new golden age could start. After suffering a slump in the early 2010s, it seemed that the remainder of the decade could be a return to form for Nickelodeon, and that they would go back to how they were in the 90s and 2000s. Nope. That ended up not happening at all. Instead of bringing in more great Nicktoons to air alongside it and SpongeBob, it would end up being the only other Nicktoon that Nickelodeon would air besides SpongeBob. And so begins the lowest point in Nicktoon history. Say what you will about Nickelodeon in the early to mid 2010s, like around 2010 to 2015, but at least there was a wide variety of shows that they aired. Yes, most of the shows weren't that good. There were a couple decent shows here and there, but the bad outweighed the good. However, at least it was variety. At least there were a selection of different shows to watch, even if most of them weren't that good. In the late 2010s though, the only Nicktoons that you could watch were SpongeBob and The Loud House, and that's it. There were no other shows that aired on Nickelodeon, except for these two. Oh yeah, it's worth noting that around this time, Cartoon Network, another once legendary animation studio, was facing heavy scrutiny from the animation community for just constantly airing Teen Titans Go over and over and over and over and over again without airing any other show. Now, some of you might be asking, why was the animation community okay with Nickelodeon milking SpongeBob in the Loud House, but they weren't okay with Cartoon Network milking Teen Titans Go? I don't know. No, seriously, I actually don't know. I can't even think of a valid reason. This is just straight up f***ing double standards. It's hypocritical. I remember back in like 2017, I would see memes and whatnot about how like Nickelodeon is doing better while Cartoon Network is doing worse, when the truth is they were doing equally bad. I guess the mentality is that milking two shows is better than milking one show. Like, I don't get it. It genuinely doesn't make any sense to me at all. It's extra funny as well, considering the fact that Cartoon Network would eventually stop milking Teen Titans Go. Unfortunately, much bigger problems would come up with Cartoon Network in the years to come, but there was a brief period of time, a brief period of peace and harmony between Cartoon Network milking Teen Titans Go and Cartoon Network being on the verge of death. Nickelodeon, on the other hand, it's just been the same old, same old. Ever since, I don't know, 2017, it's just been SpongeBob and the Loud House, and that's it. Basically, any modern Nicktoon that's not SpongeBob or the Loud House would just be largely ignored, not only by Nickelodeon themselves, but also from the animation community. Shows like Rise of the TMNT and Glitch Text that had the potential to become modern Nickelodeon classics in the vein of Danny Phantom or Avatar: The Last Airbender, they just became ignored simply because they're not Loud House. They weren't making money like Loud House and SpongeBob were. And so what do we get instead of these future classics? What do we get instead? We get even more SpongeBob and Loud House. We got Camp Coral. We got the Patrick Star Show. We got the Casa Grandes. We got the Really Loud House. A f***ing live action version of the Loud House, which I'm pretty sure is something that literally nobody wanted. We got a Loud House movie that was really boring and generic. We got not one, but two live action Loud House movies, a Christmas movie and a Halloween movie. And yes, the Halloween movie came out recently this year. I bet y'all didn't know that it happened, but it did. You know, forget Spider-Verse, forget Barbenheimer. This was the big movie event of 2023. This is what y'all should have been hyping up for real. Spider-Verse and Barbenheimer got nothing on this. It just keeps on going and going and going. It's really weird to me how I never see anyone talk about, like, Nickelodeon's current state in the same way I see people talk about, like, you know, Disney is dying, Cartoon Network is dying. Like, it's really weird to me. I never see that at all. I see countless videos on how, like, Disney is dying and Cartoon Network is dying and all that, and I never see it for Nickelodeon. Like, I don't get it. Are you really okay with this? Like, y'all don't see a problem with this? This somehow isn't as bad as the Warner Bros. Discovery stuff with Cartoon Network or Disney's blatant neglect of their own animated movies. Like, this is somehow fine to y'all? Like, be real with me. And you know, the crazy thing is that the stuff with Cartoon Network and Disney and whatever, there's like fairly recent stuff from like a year or two ago. Nickelodeon's downfall has been going on since like in 2017, 6 years ago, and I've seen like nobody talk about it compared to the Cartoon Network and Disney stuff. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. So I spent a lot of time talking about like the Loud House and how it affected Nickelodeon, but I haven't spent as much time talking about the show itself. Yeah, it's kind of crap, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna get some positives out of the way. For one thing, I actually like the art style of the Loud House. I like the comic book aesthetic that it has. The art direction really does make it feel like a Nicktoon from the early 2000s. Like, I could see this airing alongside the Fairly Odd Parents or Chalk Zone or whatever in like 2003, 2004. There are little Easter eggs here and there in the show that I find really cute. Like, in one episode, there's a SpongeBob Easter egg. In another episode, episode. There's cameos from characters from like different Nicktoons. And in one episode, there's even a reference to the infamous Lost comic from Control Alt Delete. You know, it's things like that, you know, it adds a little bit of charm to the show. Unfortunately, it's not enough to save it. Now, I'm gonna admit that I have a little bit of a history with this show because around like 2017 or so, I just realized how trash this show was. And like back then, saying The Loud House was bad was a far more like controversial, unpopular opinion. Now it has basically become the norm. It has become the more popular opinion. Lincoln's a bland character, there's nothing really to say about him, and like the sisters are all like stereotypes, one-dimensional. I gotta admit, I have not kept track with the show at all. This is probably the first time I've done a search for the worst cartoon, and I don't even watch a single episode of the show at all, so I'm just going off of what I remember this show being like. And I do remember quite a bit, actually. For all I know, all these years later, these characters have actually changed and now they have more developed personalities, but I have no idea. I couldn't tell you at all. For all I care, they're just the one-dimensional stereotypes. You could just describe them with one simple short sentence. The bratty one, the dumb blonde, the edgy goth, that sort of thing. There is nothing interesting about these characters at all. It's really weird to me how a show with such a boring premise has lasted for this long. Like think about it, like Danny Phantom, Avatar The Last Airbender, and Jimmy Neutron all had shorter lifespans than this show, and they all have way more interesting premises. It actually bothers me a lot that this is the 4th longest running Nicktoon of all time. Rugrats, The Fairly Odd Parents, and SpongeBob are the only Nicktoons to have lasted longer than this. That actually bothers me to no end. Oh yeah, the humor sucks for this show. Like, it's not funny at all. And it also reinforces the weird double standards that the animation community had with the Loud House when compared to other cartoons that they would hate on. This show has quite a fair bit of toilet humor. No, I'm not going to show any examples, just in case there are any weird people watching this, but it's just really confusing to me how like nobody has a problem with it. Like people complain about like toilet humor in Sanjay and Craig, toilet humor in Breadwinners, toilet humor in Fanboy and Chum Chum, toilet humor in Teen Titans Go, and yet when there's toilet humor in Loud House, nobody cares. There are zero complaints. I just hear dead silence and that's it. In particular, there was a running gag in the early seasons of the show. I have no idea, admittedly, if they're still doing this in the show. If they're not doing it at all now, if they stop doing it, then that's a good thing, but at the same time, not really, because they shouldn't have done it in the first place. Like, they just really shouldn't. Lincoln has a best friend named Clyde, and Clyde has a massive crush on Lincoln's oldest sister, Lori, to the point where every time he sees Lori, he would nosebleed. It would be bad enough if this was just like a one-time joke, but no, they would do this again and again and again and again, and every single time. It is the cringiest thing I have ever seen in my life, and yet somehow nobody had a problem with it. If this was in Teen Titans Go, y'all would be going ape over it. Y'all would be going ballistic over it, but because it's from Loud House, that somehow makes it okay. Like, what the is the logic behind that? Seriously. And of course, I cannot make a video on the Loud House without talking about the elephant in the room. The fan base. The Loud House has probably the worst fan base for any cartoon ever. Like, say whatever you want about, like, bronies or whatever, but, like, bronies are nothing compared to these people. Now, I'm not saying that every single Loud House fan in existence is like this. I'm sure there are normal fans. I'm sure there are fans that will look at the stuff that I'm about to talk about and be like, yeah, bro, that's cringe. I agree. I don't support that stuff. But there is so much garbage in the fan base. So much disgusting garbage that it's just... It's crazy. I believe there was a video that was made recently that talked about the show's fandom, and that got pretty big, and it honestly kind of inspired me to make a search for the worst cartoon on this. Truth be told, I had planned on making this video for a while, but I didn't know if I wanted it to be a search for the worst cartoon or not, and I decided, you know what, I might as well do it. I'm not gonna miss out on this opportunity. I don't even care what people say. Because some of the stuff that the fan base can produce, it just makes me think, you know what? Yeah, this is Search for the Worst Cartoon worthy. I don't even care. So, for starters, going with probably the tamest thing that I'll bring up here, there is, for some reason, a really large amount of like edgy Loud House fan art that depicts all of the characters and whatnot in like sad, depressing scenarios. I don't want to show off any specific pieces of fan art because I don't want to like offend the artists in the event that like they come across this video. I don't want it to come off as like me saying like their art is trash or whatever. But it's just I have to question the mindset behind it. Like I have to question what drives people to draw these kinds of pictures with Loud House. Like, why is it Loud House specifically? I remember back a few years ago, there was this trend on YouTube, Sad Loud House, where basically people would upload these compilation videos that just consisted of Loud House, like edgy Loud House fan art. And these videos would get quite a fair amount of views. They'd get like 100,000 views or so. Some videos, I believe, got 1,000,000 views. And I just have to wonder, like, why did these videos like get so big? Just why though? There's nothing wrong with like making like depressing fan art or whatever, but like it's always Loud House, and I have no idea why. Like, I can understand it when it's a cartoon that has a more serious tone to it, like Steven Universe or whatever, but like, this is meant to be a comedy. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. You ever think about how, like, you have these wholesome, family-friendly, happy-go-lucky shows, like The Loud House and that one dog cartoon that nobody will shut up about, and they just, despite their wholesomeness and whatever, they just get all kinds of edgy, depressing fan art and whatnot, fan fictions made out of them. And then you compare that to a show like Breaking Bad, which is like a dark, serious show, and then the fan base is just, they just put out stupid, goofy shit like this. It's a weird world we live in, seriously. Going on to something that is infinitely worse in every regard, you have I'm gonna try and be as vague as possible about this because I feel very uncomfortable talking about this. There's a subgroup of shippings that people like to do. I'm sure you know what shippings are. I don't need to explain what they are. People like to ship Lincoln with his sisters. There's a lot of artwork out there. I remember for some reason Lincoln and Lynn are like the most common one. I don't know why, that's like the most popular shipping. It doesn't matter though, because it's f***ing gross regardless. Not only is there a huge age difference between Lincoln and the sisters, but there's also, they're brothers and sisters, so, you know, even if they were like the same age, even if it's like, oh, they were both adults, like, no, it's still f***ing gross. Why would you do that? Oh yeah, I would also like to take the time to bring up how the creator of the Loud House, Chris Savino, is not a very good person. One thing that makes it hard to look back on Nickelodeon fondly is just seeing the really terrible people that like have worked there. I mean, obviously there are good people. There were good people. You have a Steven Hillenburg, you know, Steve Burns, you know, there are good people that have worked at Nickelodeon, that are associated with Nickelodeon. But then you have like really gross people like Dan Schneider and John Kay who have done like really terrible things, and it also makes it harder for me to like look back at Nickelodeon fondly, like not just the shows that they made but also the network as a whole. Sometimes I feel bad about like, you know, I get really nostalgic for Drake and Josh and iCarly and whatnot, and then I just remember like everything Dan Schneider did. For iCarly especially, sometimes I feel bad for like having nostalgia for iCarly because of the stuff that Jeanette McCurdy went through. Like, yes, I'm aware, you know, separate the art from the artist, but sometimes it's easy to do that, other times it's hard to do that. And with Dan Schneider, yeah, it's pretty hard. But anyways, because I don't want this video to get demonetized, I will say that Chris Savino did some really bad stuff. He was called out for it in 2017 and he was fired from the show. He was only involved with the first 2-3 seasons of the show, if I'm correct. It's also very much worth noting that prior to the Loud House, I don't know exactly when this happened, but this was definitely before Loud House, he had a series of comics involving a boy and his mom, who were both anthropomorphic cats, and the boy had like a crush on his mom. If it weren't for the allegations, I would just view it as like, up dark comedy and whatnot, but like the allegations make it really uncomfortable, combined with this show and the fan base that it has spawned. And yeah, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm sorry. It bothers me that like Invader Zim gets canceled and like this somehow becomes successful. Like, it doesn't make sense at all. How did this outlive Invader Zim? How did this outlive Danny Phantom? How did this outlive Avatar: The Last Airbender? It doesn't make any sense at all. Jimmy Neutron, My Life as a Teenage Robot. It doesn't make any sense. It's just a really terrible show. The show itself is not very good. The damage it has done to Nickelodeon cannot be ignored. And the fan base is just really up and disgusting. Again, I know that not all Loud House fans are like this, but still, it's really hard to ignore those that are like this. I'm sorry, but this is Search for the Worst cartoon worthy, and I don't really care what people say. And you know what? Just because I feel like making people mad, I'm gonna rank this below Velma, just because I want to make people mad. Honest to God, gun to my head, you ask me which show I would rather watch, I'm going with Velma. I don't even care what people say. All I'm gonna say is, listen, this isn't even in the bottom 5, okay? Be grateful that it's not in the bottom 5. There are cartoons that I've looked at that are far worse than the Loud House, okay? Relax. Maybe at some point in the future I'll look at the Casa Grandes, but I can't be sure of that. I need to slow down with Loud House. It felt good looking back on this old garbage again and remembering a time when people somehow thought that this was good. What a weird time that was, am I right? For the hell of it, at some point in the future, I may also make videos on the other Loud House related stuff. You know, the Casa Grandes and the really Loud House and the 2 live action movies and the animated movie. I might as well do all of it. I don't even care. I might as well get those over with. I feel like they're very long overdue. Maybe in December I'll make a video on a Loud House Christmas. I don't know. I feel like that's way overdue. I just don't care. Anyways, that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see you all in the next video. Adios.